Ladies and gentlemen, it's the 18th of September 1949, and we are looking at the next few days with great anticipation because the literature industry of our country is delving into something completely new. 205 German publishers have paid the rent of 100 Deutschmarks to demonstrate their innovations here in Paulskirche, in St. Paul's Church, and to demonstrate the diversity of literature. And with this, I would like to welcome you to the first Frankfurt Book Fair. This could have been the opening 75 years ago, something like this. But these words of welcome were certainly not spoken by a 29-year-old woman, and it was certainly also sure that we didn't have as many listeners in the audience as today, but people in 1949 were just as quickly immersed in an ecstasy of books, the book ecstasy, as Süddeutsche Zeitung wrote at the time. And today, this has grown into the biggest literary event of the world, and history goes on. And with this, welcome to the present, welcome to the opening of the 75th Frankfurt Book Fair. It's nice to see so many of you. I'm also very glad to be able to be the presenter today in this special evening. I'm Mona Amesiani. I'm a cultural journalist and presenter. And at this point, I would like to welcome not just all those present here in the hall in Frankfurt, I also would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone looking at us, watching us in the live stream. And also, I would like to extend a special welcome to all our guests from Slovenia, this year's guest of honor. Przyszło dobrodošli. In order for you to have an easier time understanding languages you may not speak, this year's event again is being translated simultaneously because you can listen to the interpretation into English, into German and into Slovenian using the headphones, and in the live stream you can also change the subtitles and we can see a sign language interpretation into German sign language and Slovenian sign language. This is my words of welcome, and for the official words of welcome, I would like to ask up on stage the chair of the Association of German Booksellers and Publishers, Karin Schmidt-Friderichs, and Juergen, director of the Frankfurt Book Fair.
So you will welcome our two guests of honor who are here, national and international wise. Thank you. I am very glad to welcome the President of the Republic of Slovenia, Her Excellency Dr. Nataša Musar, and on behalf of the Federal Chancellor, the State Minister for Culture and the Arts, Claudia Roth. Slovenia came here with a big delegation, and allow me that on behalf of the guest of honor, I'd like to welcome Minister for Culture, Her Excellency Dr. Asta Vrečko, and the Minister for Economic Affairs, Tourism and Sports, His Excellency Matjaž Han. And as a representative for many political guests, I'd like to mention the Vice Minister for Information and Communication, Mr. Tam Lan Jung from Vietnam, from Greece, the Vice Minister for Development, Christos Dimas, and from Cyprus, the Vice Minister for Culture, Dr. Vasiliki Kasyanidou, who came here to Frankfurt. And representing the many members of associations, I'd like to welcome the President of the International Publishers Association, IPA, Ms. Kali Panza from Brazil, the Vice President of IPA, Ms. Cunta Jubama from Georgia, and the Secretary General, José Boguinho. And for diplomats and consuls, I'd like to welcome the ambassadors of the guest of honor countries, Slovenia, Italy, and the Philippines. I'm very proud of this, and I'd like to hand over to my president here. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome the President of the Upper House of Parliament, Dr. Peter Tschentscher. Great to have you here. And, well, I will again welcome you, Minister of State Claudia Roth. Thank you for having come here at short notice. Thank you very much for this effort. I'd like to welcome the members of the Committee for Culture and Media in the German Parliament. For the state of Hesse, I'd like to welcome Angela Dorn, Hessian Minister for Science and the Arts, and the Secretary of State for European Matters, and the Hessian Commissioner for Anti-Semitism, Mr. Uwe Becker. For the first time, I'd like to welcome Frankfurt's Lord Mayor Mike Josef very warmly. And today we have many representatives of the town council, the magistrate, and municipal representatives of foreign citizens who accepted our invitation. Thank you very much for having accepted the invitation. Allow me that I only welcome one by name, the chairwoman of the town council and in charge of diversity, anti-discrimination and social cohesion, Dr. Nages Eskandari Grünberg, as well as Ms. Hilima Arslana. And finally, now, this goes to all of you. I'd like to welcome those who stand for the diversity and strength of Frankfurt Book Fair, our authors, publishers, award winners, exhibitors, media representatives, dear guests here in the room and in front of the screens all over the world. It's great to have you here. Thank you very much. Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs, Mr. Boos, it's great to have you here. So take a seat. You will stay here for some time. Mr. Boos, you over here, and Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs, you there. And I'd like to welcome here, in order to complete the panel, the Hessian Minister for Science and the Arts, Angela Dorn. You already heard the name. A very warm welcome to you. And I'd like the Lord Mayor of Frankfurt, Mike Josef. A very warm welcome to you as well.
So it's nice to sit together here in this round, and the the main theme of this year's book fair has just been mentioned briefly. The story goes on, and that's why I would like to know from you what kind of stories are in the backs of your mind, what are you thinking about in your routine lives, or everyday life. Minister, for example, you must have a very stressful daily life. Do you have enough time to read books? Well, of course, I have to read a lot, but books, actually, been getting short shrift. Israel was the last book I read in the summer holidays, and I wouldn't have thought it would become so topical. So the books I'm reading normally connected to what I'm thinking about. Are these all non-fiction books, or do you sometimes also pick novels when you go to bookshops? Well, certainly anything, really. And I've got 3 kids who like to read, also love to read, and that's why part of the books in my stack are actually children's literature. And Mr. Josef, as a Lord Mayor of Frankfurt, can you understand this, or what is your link with reading, and how much time do you invest in reading? Well, currently, I'm dealing with the book fair. Like everyone else, and obviously it is something special for me as a Lord Mayor to be around for the first time at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and also the fact that it's the 75th anniversary. I moved to Frankfurt 20 years ago in October 23, and that was also a book fair, and that was my first big event in Frankfurt. And I remember I was reading Carlos Safon, The Shadow of the Winds, at the time. At the time, I read it quite quickly because I didn't know many people in Frankfurt. That's why I spent lots of time reading. Now I got to know much more people in the last 20 years. I don't have as much time. Of course, I'm reading less, but Angela just said, because of the job, and also when we didn't have any kids, my wife and myself, sometimes we were reading to each other. Now, of course, the children are shouting at us in our holidays. But Frankfurt liest ein Buch. Frank was reading a book. I've been reading Streulicht, for example, and I'm fascinated by books which are taken out of daily life. Life is writing the best stories, our most dramatic stories. That's why I really prefer books from real life. Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs, of course, your situation is different because it's your job to be dealing with literature, and you're also a publisher. But is reading a hobby for you, or is it just your job? Well, the greatest hobby is to be read to. My husband really is a proficient reader, and that's my pastime. And of course, he's going to be doing a lot of reading to me after the book fair. Of course, as a publisher, I also read books which I sometimes upgrade. So I'm also sometimes doing the lectureship, the proofreading of books, and I can only recommend to all the lectors in this profession that they're doing a great job. They're doing it in literature, and I'm doing it in non-fiction. And also in my role as a chair of the association, there is also this joy or this pleasure I have of dealing with books which are on the short list of the book prize or the short list of the non-fiction list, thinking about who is going to be awarded the Peace Prize. I'm reading Salman Rushdie's autobiography at the moment because it's unimaginably good. So I owe a lot of reading time to the association, but also it's stealing away a lot of time from me. So it's a hobby and a job. And Mr. Bush, I think, is similar to you. I know that you are reading a lot. What is on your bedside table? Of course, only Slovenians, obviously. Miljana Cunta, for example, who I admire a lot because she gave me her book in Leipzig at the Leipzig Book Fair, Drago Janša, Slavoj Žižek, who is writing faster than I can think and read. So I have the best of admiration for the Slovenian authors. But do you have a reading routine in your daily life? Well, I'm always reading, and the rest is routine. So the rest, everyday life, is happening in the gaps between reading. So let's stay with routine, but let's take a look at all this. You're a director of the book fair, have been since 2005, which is a long time. And of course, a routine comes with a job. But so is this today routine? Are you thinking, well, this is the 18th time I'm opening this, I'm completely relaxed? Or is it something which really gives you a lot of tension? Well, tension is not really strong enough. I can't think of a stronger word. It's not stress. Stress is too negative, of course. It's always completely new. This animal of the Frankfurt Book Fair is completely unique in the world, and I'm so lucky to be in the middle of it and be involved with it, and to some extent also to shape it. And it's a great challenge. Sometimes also it's shocking, but it's also very rewarding if I see our industry. So please don't hesitate to applaud. The Frankfurt Book Fair, by tradition, stands for the joy of reading and the fun of stories, but it's always been very political as well. So what should the book fair be a platform for? Well, since 1949, this is the biggest democratic platform for democracy. A democracy requires you to approach each other, to listen to each other, and to read. In order to be confronted with these controversies, the discursiveness in our life, Slavoj Žižek will say it can be this way or that way, but I need books. It's a lifeline, and it's a unique feeling. It's also the pride of our book trade, and the fact that all the authors and translators and anyone involved in the industry, the job they are doing, which is important to make sure that everyone can be heard. And in the next few days in Frankfurt, lots of different nationalities will meet up. More than 95 nations will be represented in the in the fair halls. People will meet up. They will exchange. They will network. They will discuss. They will swap ideas and swap notes. Have different opinions, of course. Something which is not completely matter of course, even in 2023. So, Ms. Dorn, what is the development which gives you the greatest concern if you look beyond the confines of the nation with respect to the freedom of expression internationally? Well, we can start in our country, and you can see a general trend which is becoming more extreme as you move away. If you only get your information from your bubble, if the word alternative facts becomes reality and also is blended with propaganda, then we have an explosive mix. And we're in times of crisis and times of war at the moment. And so from my point of view, just looking at the barbarian attack of Hamas upon Israel, the biggest murder wave since Holocaust. And if you look at the fake news, the sheer number of fake news which are spread on the web about this, on the pro-Hamas side, as if this attack had been sort of provoked by Israel, so turning victims and perpetrators around. On the pro-Russian side, there is this presentation that the deliveries of arms to Ukraine were directly delivered to Hamas, and from the right-wing side there is anti-Muslim hatred which is mixed with that. So in these times of crisis, it's really crucial to get hold of the real facts. And so it's important to have a pluralism of ideas and opinions, but start listening to each other. But if we don't listen to each other, if we only move around in our own bubbles and in fake bubbles, then it's becoming more and more dangerous and more brutal. And if you then have authors and journalists worldwide who are fighting not just for freedom but also for their survival, then, of course, we have programs of being a safe haven for authors. There are authors who, for the first time coming to Germany, can speak up, and this is something which gets under your skin. If you learn about what they have been through in order to be able to speak up and to speak their minds, that's why we have a great responsibility together for democracy. And I would like to also subscribe to what Mr. Boos says and also thank Mr. Boos, because this is a place where it is possible to make these different opinions heard, and making it possible for people to listen to each other and also to think beyond one's limitations. This is what the book fair stands for, and we are so grateful. As you just mentioned, I think it's in the minds of everyone today. It's like a cloud above all of us in the world. Everyone is thinking about people who are grappling with the consequences of war in the Middle East and who've been through nightmare for 10 days. Mr. Josef, as a Lord Mayor of the German city with the second biggest Jewish community, what is your experience? What is the reaction of people like to the situation in Israel? Well, we can all see the pictures in the newspapers and on TV, and you can also see what's been going on the streets of Frankfurt and in other cities, and that's why I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Boos. The book fair has triggered political debates, has allowed political debates to happen, and you have clearly condemned the Hamas attack upon Israel, clearly. I think it's an attack on Israel by a terror organization which is murdering innocent people. There can be no two opinions about this. And so this statement, of course, has a big impact. It's not just the written word, but also the spoken word, which can be very powerful. And when it comes to the situation in Frankfurt itself, well, looking at the pictures of beheaded babies, of people who've been abducted, then you may feel powerless, but I also am impressed by the fact that on the same day we were not powerless in Frankfurt, because there was a spontaneous demonstration in favor of the Jewish community. People went and joined the Jewish community in front of the town hall and clearly condemned the Hamas activities and shown their solidarity. We should show our solidarity not just with Israel, but also with our Jewish citizens, fellow citizens, because it's never again and not again. And we shouldn't just support the Jewish community. It's not acceptable that the Jewish community is on its own when it comes to showing solidarity. It is the task of Democrats. It must come from the middle of society, from civil society, and it must be quite clear that we'll protect Jewish life in Germany. And of course, it affects me a lot when I hear that Jewish people didn't send their kids to school because there was a Hamas appeal to act against Jewish people worldwide, and we were clearly in favor of the Jewish community. We had a big rally with 1,500 people at the weekend, and also in Hamburg, Peter Tschentscher, there have been demonstrations which were celebrated Hamas violence, which had this slogan "From the river to the sea," so which really challenged Israel's rights for existence, and you banned this demonstration. I think the right to demonstration is a very high right, a very prestigious right, and people, of course, are asking me what's happening, what's going on with people in Palestine. I think we have to deal with this in a humanist way, and we're not separated by religions. We should be joined by one thing, by the respect for human rights. And if I receive emails asking me what's happening to the civilian population of Palestine, then of course they are just as important. But these people should also accept and say that a war waged by Hamas upon Israel has happened or is happening, and that this should be condemned. And if they don't actually take note of that, then I think it's difficult to have a debate with these people. And that's what it's all about. And that's why we're backing up the Jewish community here in Frankfurt, showing our solidarity, and we will continue to do so in the next few weeks. It is especially now that we have to protect Jewish life, and we speak up for Jewish life in Germany. Well, it's very hard to make a bridge to what's following now. I would like to do so, though, because, of course, there is a dark shadow cast by this war on everyone. But 2023 for Frankfurt is a year of celebration, because 100 years ago, not 75 years ago, 100 years ago, in the St. Paul's Church, we had the first National Assembly. It is like the hour of birth of German democracy. And this was actually in 1848. And where do you see, Mr. Josef, now the need to increase political participation, especially with respect to the results of the state elections in Hesse? Well, it's 175 years St. Paul's Church, and of course it's important to have encounters to facilitate people meeting each other, because this is a bridge between nations. I think it's great that the German ambassador of Slovenia is here, who is a fan of Eintracht Frankfurt and also a member of Eintracht Frankfurt, the Frankfurt Football Club. What more do you want? And these meetings are so important, but when it comes to participation, especially in the context of the state elections here in Hesse, one thing is participation or involvement, but also taking people seriously. Participation means that you have to deal fairly with each other. And when we talk about participation, the question is, how do we organize democracy in the times of artificial intelligence and social media? What is real, what is filtered? And that's why the question of information, where does the information come from? That's an important aspect of democracy and participation. And it's also important, you're talking about the elections, Angela Dorn, and I talked about it, we wouldn't have thought that the AfD will become the second strongest party in Hesse. But to be honest, if I look at the media response, because we are really, all we do is talk about AfD and its success in the press and the coverage. I think this is wrong. I think we have to make an offer as democratic parties. We have to argue hard with each other about topics which we have been pulling our punches, really. We're talking about the book fair here. The book fair is a place where it's about finding solutions, democratic solutions to different problems. How do we deal with the speed of change, which is just too much for some people? What do we tell people when they think the change is so fast, I don't know how to afford my life? How do we deal with integration and migration without pigeonholing things? This is a task of democratic parties, so that I will not have people meeting up with me and say, Mr. Josef, I've been voting for so many different parties, but there's been no change in the last decades. I think this is what we have to achieve, to have a debate which means that people can follow us. And in Frankfurt, AfD is 8% weaker than on average in the state, but there are big regional differences. In the West, for example, AfD has 17%. In the inner city, it only has 7 or 8%. So we have to look at that very closely and have to find our own answers and not just talk about AfD and make it bigger than it actually is. So what we've discussed in the last few minutes, we can summarize by saying these are very uncertain times for many people. There is a lot of uncertainty, and it feels like a tipping point. It feels like change and crisis. We're experiencing political division, crises, natural disasters. But let's go back to the book, Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs. What is the power of books in these difficult times? Well, the advantage of books is that they are a slow medium. Their genesis is slow, and as I mentioned, proofreading, lectureship, and editors, editing, they go through at least a 4 eyes principle. And compared with the faster other media, where there is a kind of quick reaction, my question is, where is the reflection in these other media? do people really think hard about things and reflect on things? And that's the advantage of books in this time. And the slowness is the biggest advantage. I'm not in favor of meat, but those people who eat meat will know that it's cured meat which is best, and cured information is the best information. So comparing books with cured meat, for those people who love meat, for the others I have to think up some other metaphor. Anyway, this time you take for yourselves, and at the time they will survive, because there are lots of prints and print runs of books sometimes. That's their strength. And also another feature of books is you can't read and do something else at the same time, which is great, because for all the other types of activities we always do other things at the same time, so which makes our mind less focused. And this means that we can't think up bright ideas, because we're not actually multitasking people and animals, and reading forces us to stop and think. And this is the biggest advantage of books. And I'd like to tell this to all the exhibitors. You should be proud of that, because that's what we can offer. Well, all of us realize this, and you don't have to pitch books to us, because we're all convinced of the books anyway. It's such a great medium, because it's so slow, because it focuses our minds so greatly. But we are not reality in this room. Reality is much bigger. Lots and lots of people are not actually consumers of books. They are not recipients of books and culture. Ms. Dorn, so what are you doing as a state government to change this? Well, of course, we have a big focus on cultural education, starting in schools, but also ranging right across to old age. It's not very popular, but I've always in favor of an idea not of culture being free of charge, but there should be cultural education. And going to museums shouldn't be a hindrance. There shouldn't be a barrier to going to a museum. And also we need to promote reading and reading skills, and getting to know authors, meeting up with authors, talking with them, getting to know literature. So there are so many places where we need support. Libraries, I think, are absolutely essential in this respect. And I would also like to thank Claudia Roth for the programs we have to promote libraries, public libraries, to make them the second living room in our city. I don't want to compare libraries with a book fair, but there are places of encounter where you think beyond yourselves, and you have a discussion over a cup of coffee, or you get immersed in a book. And the focus should be on education. In order to be able to read, you don't have to not just learn how to spell, but you have to understand words, you have to understand ideas. And this is the biggest resource in our country, is education, and the biggest chance of telling kids and young people that having good reading skills is a great step forward for our future. Last question to you, Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs. Since we're talking about political demands and political responsibility, you have an idea, an overview over the book industry in Germany, the bookshop owners, for example, in Germany. So what is your wish of politicians? What is something which is missing in your point of view? Well, I would like to wish clearly for the promotion of reading skills, not just as a spokesperson for this industry, but also as a citizen of this country, because the deciphering of letters is something we have to learn. And if 1 in 4 kids leaves primary school without these skills, then 1 in 4 kids in which we put our hopes for the future cannot live up to this hope, because reading is a core competence. So not understanding means I can't solve a problem. And I would like to link this wish with a word of thank you, because we have a culture pass. I've had it for a few months, and 18-year-olds now get a free gift of 200 euros. And it's a great gift, and it's really taking it's completely flabbergasting. More than half of the money the 18-year-olds get is spent for books. And the wish is, let's go on with it, let's carry on with it, and you can do it for younger people even. So I just said it was the last question, but since his story must go on, and the next chapter will be opened here in Frankfurt, as the last, I would like to have a final round, starting with you, Mr. Boos. I'd like to know what you are looking forward to most in the next few days until Sunday. It could be a big thing, for example, the opening of the pavilion for the guest of honor, or the first cup of coffee in Aubergine in Hall 3. I think in my case it's a big thing. I'm just looking forward to meet up with Salman Rushdie tomorrow, who is standing for the book fair and who I simply admire. Well, I'll do some advertising. We have a Hess stand, and looking forward to that, and looking forward to the people I mentioned before. They will have the safe haven at the Hess stand. They will be able to present their poems, for example, and I've worked hard to make this possible. Well, I would like to subscribe to it. I'm looking forward to the Peace Prize and Salman Rushdie at this time when many people talk about human rights, welcoming Salman Rushdie in Paulskirche, and also the cultural input from Slovenia. And it may become boring, but the answer would be the Peace Prize too. But I also would like to add a personal remark which also relates to Sunday. Half of my life I've been a publisher exactly, and also I'm looking forward that after the Peace Prize award I can go to the stand at the last time and I say goodbye to my team, because publishers require a team supporting it. Okay, this takes us in our minds to Sunday night even. So I'm looking forward to the next point, or the point where you have to come up again, Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs, because you'll come up here at the end of this event to open the fair officially. So thank you, Juergen Boos, Angela Dorn, Mike, Josef, Karin, Schmidt-Friderichs.
Well, they look very small, but we all know they have an incredible effect on us, on the environment. They fly off and come home with a drop of nectar or a few grains of pollen. And like the world of bees, culture and language in Slovenia is shaped by very diverse influencing factors. Honeycomb of words, I think, is a wonderful motto of our guest of honor this year. And I think I can speak for all of us. We look forward to learning more about the diversity of Slovenian culture in the days to come. So we will start right now, because we will meet two artists who take us along on a journey into the world of music of Slovenia. They will play a medley of 3 compositions on very special instruments. I will tell you more about this afterwards. But first of all, let's enjoy this and welcome Boštan Gombač and Nevč Škofič. Boštjan Gumbac and Nate Škofic, thank you very much. Very special, really cool. And I already mentioned what we heard. It didn't sound special, but it is special. Boštjan Gombac, among other things, played on a replica of a so-called Neanderthal flute. New to me, and it is supposed to be the oldest musical instrument in the world. Archaeologists found first Neanderthal flute in the mid-1990s when they were active in excavations in Slovenia, and the age of the flute is around 50 to 60,000 years. So the motto, "The story goes on," also applies here. And we continue as well. I'm very pleased to ask our next speaker to join me on stage. Well, I would have liked to announce the Federal Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, but most of you will know that he left for Israel this morning, and this is why she is here, and we are very glad to welcome her, the Minister of State for Culture and the Media. A very warm welcome to Claudia Roth. President Nataša Pirc Musar, dear colleague Asta Vrečko, guests from Slovenia, Your Excellencies, colleagues of federal, state and city governments, people responsible for the Frankfurt Book Fair, dear publishers, authors, book lovers, dear Democrats, and dear musicians. I think they touched our hearts with wonderful, enchanting music. Thank you very, very much. Well, you know, Federal Chancellor Scholz left for Israel today, and he asked me to speak here on his behalf, and he asked me to convey his best wishes for the book fair. A book fair is a marketplace of words, an exchange of scriptures, different types of literature and interpretations, and this is hardly conceivable without its origin, the places of origin, without the nations of scriptures of the Near and Middle East. What would we be without you? What is at stake if you no longer trust the word? Scriptures need to be read. Literature needs silence, concentration, the willingness of its readers to open up to the world, to your own self and to the other person. Those who murder children, rape women, kidnap families, take people hostage, abandon all this to barbarism and destroy any basis for understanding and a human coexistence. Missiles on Israel, attacks on cities and towns near the border with the Gaza Strip, Hamas terrorists hunting civilians, visitors celebrating the Supernova Festival near the Reim kibbutz, terrorists killing hundreds of people and abducting as many only an hour's drive from Tel Aviv. It's an attack against women, men, and children in Israel and against guests from all over the world. It's an attack against people because they are Jewish. It's an attack against the state of Israel, its culture, its open society, which exactly where it was attacked did not do anything against anybody. We deeply condemn this, and we are full of grief and pain, standing at the side of the victims, the families who fear for their loved ones. And unfortunately, there are pictures from our country showing how people supporting Hamas celebrate this bloodlust, and we must not tolerate this. This is absolutely unacceptable. If Jewish people in Germany are afraid to send children to school, to visit the synagogue, or to be recognized as Jewish on the street, then I must tell you, never again is right now. And we need all the means of our defensible constitutional state to put hatred and all those who preach it in its place. Our task is to protect, promote, and strengthen the Jewish life in our country, which is so rich and diverse. And we are so lucky to have this in our country again, especially now. And as a society, we want to set an example, a sign of solidarity with Israel and the Jews who are part of our country. Set an example against the inhumane barbarism. Setting an example for humanity, for humaneness, for human dignity. But in difficult times like these, how can we celebrate a festival of the book? And this is what is happening here at Frankfurt Book Fair. I'm convinced that especially in times like these, reading opens our eyes. It creates understanding across all borders, and it teaches us empathy. It is right now that we need the freedom of thinking, the diversity of books and perspectives, and this is what Frankfurt Book Fair represents. Reading allows you to experience things you never experienced yourself. It enables you to have new insights and perspectives. Reading means enjoying and sharing stories, opening up a whole range of new worlds. With every chapter, with every new page, we can overcome opposites which sometimes seem irreconcilable in our everyday life. Reading proves every day that despite our differences, we can understand each other, that our society is by no means doomed to drift apart, even though some people claim that this is a fact, even though some people support this. Every story told is worth telling. Literature does not only live from those who can talk about it in the smartest and most highly educated way. Literature lives from those who read, who immerse deeply in reading. And this is why the diverse publishing landscape in our country is invaluable to our democracy. And this is why the thousands of books presented here every year are good news for our country, for our society. Honeycomb of words. Honeycomb of words, the motto that your country, Madam President, has chosen for its role as a guest of honor at this year's book fair, expresses the unifying, sustaining, and community-building effect of literature in a wonderful way. In the poem I Told You by the Slovenian lyricist Srečko Kosovel, this is where this idea comes from. He talks about the honeycomb of humanity growing beyond the confines of individual nations. And honeycomb of words is the motto of Slovenia, a beautiful image, gathering words in a country that can draw from the full, where in addition to Slovenian as an official language, the languages Italian, Hungarian, German, Croatian, Serbian, and Romani are spoken as well. Slovenia is like a hive of words, of languages, of cultures, of legacies, of conquerors from large neighboring linguistic regions who came and who left again. We survive because we are readers, Miha Kovac told the FAZ newspaper, because reading, he says, teaches you how to think, and a small nation in Europe has to master the art of thinking. Your country, Madam President, in its history has almost always been a borderland. Krain, Kraina, border mark, the ancient name for one of today's parts of Slovenia clearly indicates this. All too often in European as well as in Slovenian history, words like these were synonymous with the right of the fittest, war and occupation, domination of a foreign country, and the arduous struggle for independence. Today, still, Russia's illegal war against Ukraine shows precisely this history we thought had been overcome, an illegal war of aggression which denies the Ukrainian culture the right to exist, which wants to put an end to this culture. A war also directed against the culture of democracy, against the self-determination of people, how they'd like to live their lives, people in our immediate neighborhood who want to have the freedom to read in the language of their choice, read the books they want to read, who want to write and speak freely. It's a great achievement of European unification to have counted the lot of being a borderland with a community in diversity. The risk of the geographical location became the advantage of becoming a melting pot, a crossroads and a place of encounter. Situated between the Mediterranean, the Balkans and the Alps, Slovenia represents European diversity in the smallest of spaces, gathering influences from everywhere and creating new word honeycombs. The great Slovenian poet France Pežeren also wrote parts of his work in German. And the Slovenian writer Alma Karlin was one of the most popular German-language travel writers between the two world wars. And yet, at the same time, it was passionately adhering to one's own language, which preserved the rich cultural identity that we can discover here in Frankfurt. The 32 years since the foundation of the Republic of Slovenia are contrasted with more than 1,000 years of written evidence in the Slovenian language. And today, an enormous wealth, a bulging honeycomb of literary productions. In a country of 2 million people, some 3,500 books are published every year, 300 of them being volumes of poetry. No wonder that Slovenia is sometimes praised as the country with the highest density of poets. The highest density of poets. This is what it's praised for. Well, I am very, very happy that so many Slovenian authors are here in Frankfurt and allow us to look at the world through their different perspectives: traditional, modern, diverse, Slovenian, and typically European. And I'm glad that this fair will contribute to bringing even more works from Slovenia to German bookstores. And I'd like to say a special thank you to those who make foreign language literature accessible to us in the first place, the translators. More than 9,400 translated titles have been published in Germany. Last year alone, 9,400 different words, which otherwise would have remained incomprehensible in the truest sense of the word. You, dear translators, pave the way for us. You make other realities tangible. Without you, there would simply be no world literature. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I talked about reading as a daily practiced willingness to question one's own perspective and to put oneself in the shoes of the others. This willingness is important, it's essential for our democracy. Especially now, in times of upheavals, challenges, crises, conflicts, worries, wars, where supposedly simple solutions are booming. Especially now, we need books, and we need to allow for other opinions to exist as a counterweight and immunization against the attacks of enemies of democracy and the rule of law, against populism and against propaganda. And especially in times of war and crisis, literature can help those affected by war and terror to process what they experience, to fight against speechlessness, to describe the almost indescribable. And literature can help us to understand and to feel empathy. Booksellers not only offer inspiration and advice. Bookstores are also important, very important cultural venues throughout the country. So I'm glad about the good sales figures regarding the book market, and especially I'm happy about the fact that the traditional bookstore is still the biggest distribution channel. And of course, we will keep supporting the book industry with the fixed book price law, the reduced VAT rate, or the special postal rate for shipping books, of course. And, of course, also with diverse promotion of literature, with awarding of the German bookstore prize and the publishing prize, and with the support of bookstores and publishers based on the New Start Culture program following the COVID pandemic. And it was mentioned before, and I would like to express my pleasure about the success of the Kulturpass, the Culture Pass. More than 200,000 of those who already turned 18 used their €200 budget for their trip to culture. And for many of them, probably the first time that they are turning towards the rich culture of our country, and some of them hopefully will use the opportunity to buy a reduced admission ticket here at the book fair in order to attend this book fair. And what is the offer where the Culture Pass is used most? Well, as a matter of fact, despite all cultural pessimism, it's buying books. By far number one. By far number one. More than 60,000 books have been bought by the young people since mid-June in a bookstore. And for many of them, it probably was the very first time entering a bookstore, browsing, and this bookstore turning into their bookstore. And sales of more than 4 million euros have been generated in the book sector. We only started mid-June, and I think this is the right development, and it gives us hope for this great 75-year-old book fair. The Culture Pass is an offer of democracy, and it's not altruistic at all. Every citizen has a right to participate in public conversation, education, and culture. For democracy, of course, it is essential that as many citizens as possible are aware of this entitlement, and the Culture Pass is intended to make this easier for young people in the long run. For our valuable culture of democracy, we need you, all of you who make books possible, which stand for all the freedom and diversity of writing, publishing, reading, and thinking. And this is also why it is so important that the Peace Prize of the German book trade is awarded to Salman Rushdie. This is a strong signal, and it's a clear sign against fanaticism and for the power of the book, for the power of the free word. And this is exactly what stands for Frankfurt Book Fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia Roth. And it is a great honor for us to have you with us too. Since December 2022, she is the head of state of Slovenia, the first woman in this office in the history of her country, and she's also going to speak a few words to us in Slovenian. That's why there will be a change of headsets now. People who didn't use it will put it on now. And before we do so, let's welcome the Slovenian president, Nataša Pirc Musar. Good evening to everyone. Mr. President of Bundesrat Peter Cunta, Minister of State for Culture Claudia Roth, Lord Mayor of the city of Frankfurt Josef, President and Director of the Frankfurt Book Fair Juergen, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and dear Slovenian ministers. The book stands at the center of cultural consciousness of Slovenes. We build our identity on Slovenian language, and our language is associated with books in our consciousness, not just with any book, but with the first printed book, which was published in Slovenian in 1550. The father of Slovenian writing, Primož Druba, calls us Slovenes for the first time and talks to us as Slovenes. And in this way, he has established a link which is still true today. Slovenians are a community which is defined by the language and not by a territory. And that's why literature is an authentic expression of Slovenian character, history, and souls. We appreciate the creators of Slovenian literature, be they living inside or outside Slovenia. On the central square of Slovenian capital, there is a monument of a poet. So we also accept those people as ourselves who write in other languages and who are Slovenian. You will be able to meet some of them at the Frankfurt Book Fair in person or through their works. And it's a great honor for us that you've chosen Slovenia as the guest of honor of Frankfurt Book Fair. We are very proud that so many Slovenian authors have found publishers abroad so that their books have filled the Slovenian pavilion as a guest of honor. These dozens of authors enable us to have a great idea, a good insight into their creation, and this of course enriches our treasure. The novels by Drago Janša show us dark secrets but also beauty and love in times of difficulty. Slavoj Žižek is probably the most translated Slovenian author and a superstar of international philosophy. Erika Johnson de Beljak writes in English, but Slovenia is her home country, and her works are bestsellers. Alma Keitlin was a world traveler 100 years ago when it was not acceptable for women to travel on their own, and she has written lots of novels in German, and you can also get to know her in the Haus am Dom exhibition. The Corinthian writer Maja Hamza shows through her Slovenian and German voice that there were difficult times and sides to Corinthian history. The Boris Pacham has been through the worst period of the 20th century, and for all his life he was a victim of deportation, but still remained faithful to the Slovenian culture. An important message of his book, Necropolis, is that we should not condemn nations or peoples, but dictatorships who humiliate communities and nations. And it is a message which is crucial in view of the tensions in Ukraine, in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere. I am sad to see so many conflicts worldwide. There are at least 55. Some of them have been going on for decades. And one conflict, the one in the Gaza Strip, is very present in our minds here in Frankfurt. The slaughter in the hands of the Hamas terrorist organization makes me speechless, and all I can do is condemn it again and again. But what we see in the Gaza Strip is also an attack on human dignity, and what is done there makes me worried. The number of victims of violence is on the rise. And amongst these victims are also children, which is simply not acceptable. And that's why I call for a stop, putting a stop to violence and respecting the rule of law, international law, and human rights. And for this, on this occasion, for the festival of the book, I would like also to say that it's very, very important to read books, to be educated, and to be well read. And they say that a pen is stronger than a sword. And so the strength of the book is evidence in the shape of the book fair. This makes us a civilization. In the Slovenian pavilion, you'll see two special things. Lots of poets who are writing today. They are carrying the flame of linguistic expression from the time of Franzi Bescheren, whose works are a great example of European Romanticism. You can get to know him in the pavilion, and his poem, Long Live All Peoples, waiting for the day when under this sun the world puts an end to conflict and everyone should be free. No one should be an enemy, just a neighbor for the future. That is a message of peace, which was very topical when it was written and is still very topical today. And because of this message, this poem became the Slovenian anthem. And its message, or the message of poems, is highly appreciated in Slovenia. And the second aspect of the pavilion is the return to books. On paper, the digital age helps us on our way through the flood of pictures and sounds, but it leads to some kind of superficial approaches, superficiality, and therefore reading books is not the same. So there was a festival in Ljubljana about books on paper, and this is the basis for analytical thinking. It is of the greatest importance for a functioning democracy. It's only a well-informed citizen who can be critical about the facts he's confronted with, can actually be an active part of democratic processes. Margaret Atwood said that the end of literacy campaign, or literacy is the end of democracy. At the Frankfurt Book Fair, publishers find authors, authors find publishers. Slovenian authors have been active at this book fair for a long time. 400 years ago, in the fair's catalogue, there was a dictionary where German, Italian, Latin, and Slovenian were the languages in the book. So this is quite symbolic because Slovenia is at the contact or an interface between 4 linguistic groups and landscape types. And the Slovenian publishers and the Slovenian language had to be resilient in order to survive history. The number of translations is on the rise, and now Slovenia is the guest of honor of this fair. The fair is very well known in Slovenia. In the past, in Slovenia, we also had a fair which was called Frankfurt after Frankfurt. So Frankfurt was the point where business was made, deals were struck, and Germany is #1 of the foreign trade partners of Slovenia. So the interdependency between the Slovenian and German economies is reflected not just in the automotive industry, machine building, or the pharmaceutical industry, but also in terms of anything to do with books. Even before the authors came here, we had printers going to Frankfurt, for example, who bought printing machines for Slovenian printing companies. And the first Slovenian book, as I mentioned, was printed in 1550 in Slovenia, but it was printed in Germany. So the Day of Reformation, which is a national holiday, is important also because it's also a festival of the book, because Protestant authors were the ones who made sure that the Slovenian language prevailed. And on the list of UNESCO Memory of the World, there is one printed book. It's the Bible. It was printed in 1538 in Wittenberg. So, dear guests, dear ladies and gentlemen, Slovenia has been independent for 32 years, but the contacts and the links with Germany in the field of books go into the distant past. They reach into the distant past, and the oldest writing in Slovenian was created in the monastery of Freising, and it is now kept in the Bavarian State Library. So it's more than 1,000 years old. So we're working on a history which is more than 1,000 years old, and the making Slovenia the guest of honor in Frankfurt is certainly not the last step in this history. And so this week, Slovenia will come closer to Germany, Germany closer to Slovenia, and also to literature. Bertolt Brecht said that books can be a weapon, and please get hold of it. As a mother, as a woman, I would wish that it's not just Slovenian kids and German kids get hold of books, but that also the kids in Palestine and Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I don't know what you think, but I thought it was a shame to use the headphones for the German version because I love listening to the Slovenian language, and when I got ready for this evening, I really learned appreciating the language. I learned a lot. For example, that in Slovenian there is not only singular and plural, but also a dual. Dual, this is something you can use, well, I see you nodding, when you're referring to exactly two individuals. I thought I want this in German. This is so cool. If I were able to speak Slovenian, I would be glad to use this numerous, the two numbers, if you can call it this, because we will now hear the contributions of two more Slovenian guests. We will start with an author who mostly works in the field of poetry, and in 2020 her poetry collection Tagesgedichte was published in a German translation, and in the minutes to come she will take us along into the special solitude of her text. A warm welcome to Miljana Cunta. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, lovers of literature and poetry. Dear lovers of literature and poetry, a poem is born in solitude. You can travel long roads, you can experience much, love, and leave many things behind. But you stand alone before every poem. Hilde Domin said, all the birds are silent, you only hear your own footstep, and the step the foot has not yet taken but will take soon. Anyone who has tasted the solitude of creativity knows how accurate these simple lines are. A blank page is a place of anxiety and expectation. The distances opening within you are greater than any of the distances you've ever crossed. Suddenly, it no longer matters who you are, but what you can become. To find the answer, you have to step into the void. Well, after all, there are not so many things we must do entirely on our own, writes Kathleen Rain. Birth, prayer, death, and the creative art. Only few people like to be alone, and many cannot bear it. Poets must have a strong power of enduring active and arduous solitude. Solitude even in the midst of the world. The impulse driving a person into the solitude of the poem has been called many different things in the past. Madness, mania for which poets must be banished from the ideal state. The feeling of I must, which wakens in the wee hours of the night and won't let you sleep. The joy of the game, delight in the ludistic play of meanings, and even an alternative to suicide, which channels thoughts of destruction into the building of new worlds. Different literary historical periods have come up with their own definitions of poetry making. The house of poetry was entered through the doors of literary theory, linguistics, philosophy, psychology, psychoanalysis, theology, ecology, and so on. Poets themselves have added their own contributions, describing what they do with the kind of passion we reserve for speaking of our deepest desire, a desire as old as humanity itself. But with such attempts to define poetry, we find ourselves on slippery ground. When we take apart a music box to discover how it works, we are left holding only the pieces, sadly disjointed and completely useless. Poetry happens somewhere else. It always happens somewhere else. Octavio Paz, who believed that poetry was more than just the skill of putting words together, called it la otra voz, the other voice. Its voice is a different one, he wrote, because it's the voice of passion and vision. It comes from the other world, and this worldly of days long gone and of this very day, an antiquity without dates. Heretical and devout, innocent and perverted, limpid and murky, aerial and subterranean, of the hermitage and of the corner bar, within hand's reach and always beyond. Because it's something other. This is why poetry unsettles us. It challenges our conception of time and space, it connects opposites, it loves paradox. Images from ordinary life become extraordinary. The living sit at the same table with the dead. There is no professional education that makes us a person to be a poet. There is only the other voice which demands another language. The other voice is the voice of creation. It speaks of the interior life in a way that is both testimony and creation. It tells us of what is and what could be. The Slovene poet Edvard Kočbek wrote, "I am never what they think I am and never where eyes see me." This never is where poetry enters with all its warmth and passion, with a language that is constantly widening its boundaries, and by doing so, widening the boundaries of our world as well. What we've admired in poetry for millions of years is the human mind with all its ingenuity, its inexhaustible abundance, its complexity, and its beauty. The times we live in, however, do not favor complexity and beauty. They are drawn to repetition, replication, uniformity, simplification. The question hanging in the air after every celebration of the poetic art always remains the same. Why poetry in needy times? Once a poem has been written and published, it goes out into the world. It enters the so-called literary system, where it is one poem among many, subject to the laws of the market, the poetic canon, and the personal taste we so love to talk about. It may be lucky, it may even be lauded at the world's largest book fair, where it crosses from language to language and culture to culture, something which is extraordinary and unforgettable. Or it may not be so lucky and will have to survive in some other way, but whatever the circumstances of its existence in the literary system, the only thing truly necessary for its survival is to find its reader. Numbers are not important here. What is important is that the poem is read from within the deepest solitude, the same solitude from which it grew. Reading poetry presents an immense challenge nowadays, which is losing its balance between feeling and thinking. and which is made nervous by the unruliness of the interior life. If we as readers are to hear the other voice that flows through the poem like a subterranean stream, we need not only knowledge and understanding, but also another kind of view. A critic once wrote about one of Andrei Tarkovsky's films that the viewer must watch it as one watches the stars or the sea, or as one admires a landscape. There's no mathematical logic here, for it cannot explain what man is or what is the meaning of his life. End of the quote. When we read poetry with our reason and our heart, but also as one watches the stars, we will never come to the end of it, because it arose out of need, of noble mania, of deepest solitude. It will never die. For what it has captured in language is infinitely greater than poetry itself. So what then is the use of poetry in needy times? To build a community, not some homogeneous community of people with similar opinions and outlooks, but a subterranean, utterly diverse fellowship of readers who find a connection in the fact that they all listen to that other voice and bear the burden of their own solitude. Where I come from, we enter into poetic creation respectfully, being aware of the fact that the meeting of language and poetic vision can conjure up something that is powerful and true. We know that there are times in a person's life, in the life of a nation, when poetry is the only possible answer. And this is not only a myth, this can be seen in the poem in the anthology Mein Nachbar auf der Wolke, My Neighbor on the Cloud, which was produced especially for Slovenia's role as a guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and hopefully you will be able to read it in translation. Perhaps this is why Slovenia has such a rich tradition of poetry, which is an essential part of our abundant literary life. Perhaps this is why the statue on the main square of our capital city is not that of a soldier or general, but of a poet whose verses about the brotherhood of nations are sung by our world-famous athletes with no less emotion than by our political leaders. Perhaps this is why it was a poet we entrusted with the reading of the declaration in which we expressed our desire for independence. Poetry works similar to hope. It's born from a surplus of meaning and energy, so that it can challenge the status quo, can inspire and connect us, and can answer the most urgent of questions, the questions you can only ask yourself. What I wish for each of you is that in the wealth of books offered by this extraordinary book event, you find just such a poem and carry it with you back home. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Miljana Cunta. So, certainly a very beautiful speech, which we'll take home with us now, and maybe we will find a similar poem. Which brings us to one of the best-known philosophers of the present. The president just called him a superstar. You could call him that, and he's grappling or dealing with German idealism, Hegel, Karl Marx, but also there were some French philosophers, and of these texts there are quite many. More than 20 monographies have been published by him in spring in this year. The German book, The Paradox of Lust, has been published. So welcome, Slavoj Žižek.
Wait with the applause. At the end, you will not applaud. I'm proud to be here at the book fair because books, as we heard it again and again today, are needed more than ever. Without them, there is no solution to the terrifying Gaza war. Why? I unconditionally condemn the Hamas attack on Israelis close to Gaza border without any ifs and buts. And I give Israel the right to defend itself and destroy the threat. However, I noticed a strange thing. The moment one mentions the need to analyze the complex background of the situation, one is, as a rule, accused of supporting or justifying Hamas terrorism. Are we aware how weird this prohibition to analyze, to see the complexity is? In what society does this prohibition belong? Here, my first provocation, in a society which is, it's not here, which is structured like Waben, honeycomb. What an idiot did choose this as a light work. Do you know how Hanis live? It's the most totalitarian society you can imagine. More than 80% are women who are de facto castrated, not allowed to develop sexually, they just work. Then you have one queen who once in a lifetime has sex with 10 men, and when they have orgasm, the penises are immediately swallowed by her. No, thanks, I don't want to live in such a society. So let me go to my point. The title of a recent dialogue on anti-Semitism and BDS, Boycott, Divest, and so on, in Der Spiegel was, auf Deutsch, wer Antisemit ist, bestimmt der Jude und nicht der potenzielle Antisemit. I translate. Who is an anti-Semite determines the Jew and not the potential anti-Semite. Okay, sounds logical. The victim itself should decide if it is really a victim. But does not the same also hold for Palestinians, who should be able to determine who is stealing their land and depriving them of their elementary rights? And I want to draw your attention to a beautiful detail today. Only, I think it was the very last word of the Slovene president's speech. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, this was only once that the word Palestinian was pronounced. It was just Hamas versus Israel. I'm sorry, but you have to include in this situation millions of Palestinians. Further point, by analyzing the background, I don't mean the utter stupidity masquerading as a deep wisdom. You know that saying, an enemy is someone whose story you have not heard. Sorry, I read Hitler's Mein Kampf. I heard his story. And I love Nazism, not more, but even less. Here are the two main stories about Israel today. Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, who of course lives comfortably in a five-star hotel in Dubai, said on the day of the attack, I quote, "We have only one thing to say to you, Jews. Get out of our land. Get out of our sight. This land is ours. Al-Quds, the term for Jerusalem, is ours. Everything here is ours. There is no place or safety for you." End of quote. Clear and disgusting. But did the Israeli government not say something similar, although of course in a much more civilized way? Here is the first of the official basic principles of Israel's present government. Quote from the official source: "The Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right to all parts of the land of Israel. The government will promote and develop the settlement of all parts of the land of Israel in the Galilee, Negev, Golan, and Judea and Samaria." End of quote. Or, as Benjamin Netanyahu said, quote, Israel is not a state of all its citizens. It is a state of the Jewish people and only it, end of quote. Does this principle not exclude any serious negotiation? Palestinians are strictly treated as a problem. The state of Israel doesn't offer them any hope, positively outlining their role in the state they live. So beneath all the polemics about who is more of a terrorist lies a heavy, dark cloud, or rather swamp. The mass of Palestinian Arabs who are for decades kept in a limbo, exposed to daily harassment by settlers and by the Israeli state. Who are they? Which is the land they live in? Occupied territory, West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or the state of Palestine, which is currently recognized by 139 of the 193 United Nations member states. The first generation of Israeli leaders, from Ben-Gurion to Moshe Dayan, I want to praise them here, spoke a totally different, honest language. They openly confessed that their claim to the land of Palestine cannot be grounded in some universal justice. A very actual example. On 29th of April 1956, there was an incident concerning Gaza. A group of Palestinians from Gaza that had crossed the border to plunder the harvest in the Nahal Oz kibbutz fields. The group then, Roy, a young Jewish member of the kibbutz who patrolled the fields, galloped towards them on his horse to chase them away. He was seized by the Palestinians, and when the United Nations returned the body, his eyes has been plucked out. Here is the reaction of Moshe Dayan. He delivered this eulogy at this killed Jew's funeral the following day. Listen to it. Let us not cast blame on the murderers today. What claim do we have against their mortal hatred of us? They have lived in the refugee camps of Gaza for the past 8 years, while right before their eyes, we have transformed the land and villages where they and their ancestors once lived into our own inheritance, end of quote. Can you even imagine a similar honest statement today? How far are we from the situation, even a complex of decades ago, when we were talking about land for peace agreement, two-state solution, or when even today's staunchest supporters of Israel were putting pressure on it not to build settlements in the West Bank. In 1994, Israel built a wall separating the West Bank from 1967 borders of Israel, thereby nonetheless recognizing West Bank as a special entity. All this now vanished into thin air. The emblem of today's Israeli government is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He entered politics by joining the youth movement of the Kach and Kahane Chai party, which was designated as a terrorist organization and outlawed by whom? By the Israeli government itself. When Ben-Gvir came of age for conscription into the IDF, he was barred from service due to his extreme right political background. And such a person, condemned by Israel itself as a racist and terrorist, is now, guess what? The Israeli Minister for National Security, who should safeguard the rule of law. Remember the great conflict that divided Israel in last months. Commenting the measures proposed by the Netanyahu government, Yuval Harari put it brutally. This is definitely a coup, a strike. Israel is on its way to become a dictatorship, end of quote. Israel was split between nationalist fundamentalists trying to abolish key features of the legal state power and the civil society members aware of this threat. With the Hamas attack, and that's what I consider a true tragedy, the crisis is over, the spirit of national unity prevailed. This is always a tragic moment when inner split is overcome against an external enemy. So perhaps the first thing to do is to clearly recognize the massive despair and confusion that can give birth to acts of evil. In short, there will be no peace in the Middle East without resolving the Palestinian question. I read this in the last days in Israeli newspapers themselves. I'm not in any way justifying it's a criminal thing. Yes, Israel has the full right to counterattack. But don't forget this dark, obscure background, Palestinians. The second thing is that the solution is not a compromise in the filthy sense of the proper measure between the two extremes. You know, many of my friends claim this. They say, on the one hand, yes, Palestinians have the right to be a little bit anti-Semitic, look what Israel is doing to them. Or, on the other hand, Israelis have the right to be a little bit violent, look what we did to them in Holocaust. I think there is nothing to understand here. One should go to the end in both directions, in the defense of the Palestinian rights, as well as in fighting anti-Semitism.
You cannot compare this terror of Hamas with what it's doing on the Israeli side, sorry.
I am not comparing. No, it's not relativism. I'm going much. Yeah, now you see what means in practice, listen to diversity, inclusion, yes, but this is the cancel logic. To have our way of diversity, some people, of course, must be first excluded. I'm talking about dozens of Palestinians that I know. Sorry if I explode now a little bit. If there is a person here in this room who did more to peaceful collaboration between Palestinians and Israelis, then I bow my head, but they didn't. What more can you do than this? With my friends, I co-organized in Ramallah a big meeting celebrating Walter Benjamin, a Jew. There was no problem debating it. I organized in Ramallah a cinema school, together with the Jewish, of course, professor and so on and so on. About this, you cannot compare. Of course, you cannot compare it as an act of violence. I mean, Hamas attack is absolutely ruthless, brutal, and so on and so on. But should I fall so low as to quote, with whom I agree here, Antony Blinken, American State Secretary, who said, yes, Israel has the full right to strike back, but how it does is the concern of us all. It's not just Israel against Hamas. And let's so, especially, so again, the moment you accept that, that this is not possible to fight for both sides at the same time, you lost your soul, especially today when we have something that I cannot but call anti-Semitic Zionism. You know why European right likes to support Israel. Let's go at the beginning. Look at my last book, you will have a full quote. You know who is one of the authors of it? Yes, Reinhard Heydrich. In 1936, that Heydrich wrote a letter, statement, where he says, Israelis are a wonderful nation, we are ready to collaborate with them, but not here in Germany. They should go over there. Breivik, you remember him, the crazy Norwegian guy, he had the same, totally anti-Semitic here, but there we fully support it. Not to go on with the list.
It's a shame on a day where people are murdered and massacred.
Where? In Gaza also.
Compare both sides and to relativize what was happening and what is
I don't relativize it. It was a horrible crime. I don't relativize it in any way. I'm just saying that to talk the way you did now immediately puts millions of Palestinians in an impossible position, which will then make anti-Semitism grow. Let me nonetheless go to the end. Arthur Koestler voiced a bitter truth. Quote, if power corrupts, the reverse is also true. Persecution corrupts the victims, though perhaps in subtler and more tragic ways. End of quote. This holds for both sides in the ongoing war. My ultimate hero, absolute, of the 20th century is Marek Edelman, a Polish Jew who saw this clearly. Edelman took part in the 1943 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and also in the citywide 1944 Warsaw Uprising. After the war, when his wife and children emigrated in the wake of the growing anti-Semitic campaign in Poland in 1968, he decided to stay in Poland. Comparing himself to the stories of the ruined buildings at the site of the Auschwitz camp, he said, someone had to stay here with all those who perished here, after all, end of quote. From 1970s on, he collaborated with the Workers' Defense Committee as a member of Solidarity. He took part in the Polish Roundtable talks. Towards the end of his life, Edelman publicly defended Palestinian resistance, claiming that the Jewish self-defense, which he had fought, was in danger of crossing the line into oppression. Now, to disqualify Edelman as a self-hating Jew is, I think, the ultimate obscenity. Why am I saying this here in Frankfurt at the Buchmesse? Because only through reading books, I agree here with my previous speakers, can we become aware of the situation. Literature is the privileged medium to render palpable the deep ambiguity and complexity of our predicament. I'm not mystifying poetry. On the other hand, my thesis is, to shock you again, no ethnic cleansing without poetry. Think of Rwanda. There was a big local poet there. Think about ex-Yugoslav war. Radovan Karadzic, a quite respected poet without the war, not to mention people like Mao Zedong and so on. That's why I was shocked when I learned that the award ceremony for Adania Shibli was postponed, a decision I consider scandalous. Terrorism against Israel, yes, contradicts all the values of the Frankfurt book. Yes, and so does the collective punishment of millions in Gaza, as well as the cancellation of Adana Shibli. You know, here we are approaching the paradoxes of cancel culture. Official notice is, yes, inclusion, diversity, but then all that cancel culture does is excluding those who don't fit your notion of inclusion and diversity. So I'm not only proud to be here, I'm also a little bit ashamed. Try to imagine what Marek Edelman would say if he were to be alive today. And again, to repeat, I'm at the end. No, I in no way identify or relativize what Hamas did. It was an unforgivable, brutal killing spree. Haniyeh says it clearly. It's not just about limiting Israel, it's about the annihilating the state. But the circumstances that I described in no way relativize this crime. They just make us see the background of discontent out of which such crimes, this doesn't justify them in no way, may arise. If we ignore this, if we ignore what is happening now in the West Bank, then we cannot understand the situation. I absolutely recognize fully the right of the state of Israel to exist. I'm absolutely also critical against the Palestinian Authority. For example, I think that Arafat was, in a justified way, characterized as the man who never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It was extremely stupid for him to reject the pact with Ehud Barak government organized by Clinton. So I'm not praising Palestinians. I'm just saying, see their situation on the West Bank. They are in a limbo. It's a tragedy. Sorry? Yeah, if you would have said this to other people who spoke before me also, it would have been nice. So, you see, the moment I just said it's not simple, I compare the incomparable. No, I think we should compare it. Thank you.
It's the freedom of the word, and we have to leave it as it is. This is important to me. I think for this community, and I'd like to call it one community, I think I can speak on this community's behalf. We condemn terror. We are humans, and we think in human terms on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. And we just heard about these negative attitudes, and I thank you for this mirror you showed us. And I am in deep grief about what has happened here. And it's important to me to understand that we all agree on condemning the terror, and I'm glad that we can express it this way here. I'm also glad about somebody interrupting a speech. This must be possible. I'm glad that we listened to the speech to the very end, even though we didn't like it. Maybe we even condemn it. I thank all of you. I thank the world of books. I'm honest. This is not the most relaxed moment to enter the stage as a presenter, but, well, this is where I am now, to open a book fair, and we will open this book fair. And the honor is with the president of the German Publishers and Booksellers Association. Welcome back on the stage, Karin Schmidt-Friderichs. And while you are getting ready, I have an important piece of information for you. Immediately after the traditional hammer blow, some guests of honor who are here will have to leave very quickly. And I'd like to ask all of you, more intensely than last year when it didn't work, please remain seated. This would be great. I will then officially say goodbye. Some guests will leave. The others, please remain seated. And now, Ms. Schmidt-Friderichs, it's your honor to open the 75th book fair. I'm confused about the words we just heard. And I clearly appeal to peace, tolerance, and respect for Israel. And still, I open the 75th book fair. And with this, the 75th edition of Frankfurt Book Fair is officially open. Thank you very much to all of you who attended this ceremony. Well, we will all have to think about this, I guess. Thank you to all of those who contributed to this ceremony, and I wish us a good start into this very special anniversary book fair. Thank you.